Hello and welcome back to Business Matters at the Hindu with me, K. Bharat Kumar. For a few weeks now in Business Matters, we've been looking at issues such as global oil trade, India's aviation sector policies, the country's diamond sector, the job market, and concepts such as artificial intelligence and so on. This week, let us take a look at something that we haven't touched upon in a long while, a global economic issue, an issue that affects India as much as it affects other nations that are economic superpowers. Almost all of what you will hear in this episode comes from observations or data from the IMF. The International Monetary Fund says that the world has been going into geoeconomic fragmentation for a while now. In a note earlier this year, IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva said that at a time when we all critically need international cooperation on multiple fronts, we are actually faced with the spectre of a new Cold War that could drive nations into rival economic blocs. She says that this could be a collective policy mistake that would leave everyone poorer and less secure. In the note, she uses some powerful words as warning, calling it a stunning reversal of fortune. After all, she argues, economic integration that preceded this fragmentation trend has helped billions of people become wealthier, healthier, and better educated. Since the end of the Cold War, the size of the global economy has roughly tripled, and almost 1.5 billion people have been lifted out of extreme poverty. Her concern is that these hard won benefits should not be squandered away. What is geoeconomic fragmentation? In a paper earlier this year, IMF staffer Shekhar Iyer and others have defined geoeconomic fragmentation as a policy driven reversal of integration, often guided by strategic considerations. What is driving this trend? In the paper, the authors point out that what could be driving such fragmentation are national strategic interests, such as security considerations or for the purposes of enhancing self sufficiency. Economic rivalry, such as the one between the US and China right now, could be another reason for this. An example of national strategic interest is that of India buying more and more oil from Russia. In April, India bought 70% of all seaborne Russian or Urals grade oil. Sometimes economic fragmentation may be a consequence of domestic economic policy objectives. For example, incentivizing production and employment within national borders or as a reaction against perceived unequal distribution of gains from trade. India's production linked incentive scheme is an example of the focus on raising domestic output and job creation. The United States and India are examples of nations that are trying to spur the development of their own respective semiconductor businesses. The US actually brought out the CHIPS Act that aims to nullify Chinese dominance in this sector. India likewise is trying to incentivize investments into semiconductors within the country's borders. These efforts have gathered pace, especially after the pandemic saw the breakdown of supply chains from China, causing untold hardship to industry, especially the automobile industry and consumers alike. You may have noticed how, just after the pandemic started receding, prices of electronic gadgets such as laptops had surged suddenly. It's because of the chip shortage. The automobile industry is still trying to stabilize deliveries because it has been faced with the semiconductor shortages. Maruti has been saying this for a while, the latest being in March this year, when it said it still had 3.69 lakh vehicles still waiting to be delivered, and this has been caused by the chip shortage. Trade tensions between the US and China are weighing on companies that had depended on this Asian nation significantly for their production. Apple is an example of a company that is looking to diversify its production beyond China. CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, was in India last week. He met Prime Minister Narendra Modi as well as the IT minister. JP Morgan had estimated in the middle of last year that from 5% of total Apple's production by end of 2022 to be done within India, that figure would touch 25% of total production by Apple by 2025. The business looks so good that India's premier business group, the House of Tatas, is looking to buy out the Bengaluru iPhone plant of Apple's Taiwanese supplier Wistron. How is fragmentation affecting countries across the globe? There are a few that might benefit, but the IMF chief, Ms. Georgieva, says that the longer term cost of trade fragmentation alone could range from 0.2% of global output in a limited fragmentation scenario to almost 7% in a severe scenario. This is roughly equivalent to the combined annual output of Germany and Japan. She says if tech decoupling is added to the mix, some countries could see losses of up to 12% of GDP. As cited in the IMF paper, countries have also been raising tariffs on imports to encourage local production. We have seen in an earlier episode of Business Matters how India has reacted to the EU's intention on the CBAM, or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. In this instance, the EU wants to raise tariffs on materials sourced from other countries such as India, made from processes that do not match the EU's green standards. India is saying that it will take the legal fight to the WTO because it will make its exports costlier. The unspoken sentiment, of course, is that advanced economies in the EU have industrialized early on and contributed significantly to global warming well before India started up its engines. In another instance, India had imposed some tariffs likewise on IT products, but the EU and Japan, which were impacted, took the fight to the WTO, which upheld their complaint. If India takes it to the appeals bench, then the process goes into limbo because that bench does not currently have judges following the US's objections to judges being appointed there or how they were being appointed. These are all individual instances, but taken together collectively, you'll notice that such small skirmishes between and among countries have been hitting the headlines recently. The IMF paper also says that rising geopolitical tensions have led to more protectionism and increasing use of cross-border restrictions on national security grounds. It cites data from the Global Trade Alert database as showing a rising number of trade restrictions imposed by countries, notably in high-tech sectors that are likely linked to national security or strategic competition. The chart you see on your screens now shows how trade restrictions shot up over the years, especially with the last couple of years, seeing more than a doubling of such curbs compared with even 2019. In recent times, global firms have also begun drawing alternative supply chains across the globe. How do you measure something like this, especially if there is an intent to do so? The IMF paper's authors studied company presentations, the earnings presentations, and noticed how the mention of nearshoring, reshoring, or friendshoring, such terms, have increased tenfold. Just take a look at the infographic on your screen, and you will see how, when geopolitical risk increases, so does companies' interest in reshoring. Such moves by companies to change supply chain lines across the globe have also received a policy or sometimes even a political nudge. Last year, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen had urged US firms to move toward friendshoring of supply chains to a large number of trusted countries rather than relying heavily on countries with which the US had geopolitical tensions. In Europe, the French government has been urging the European Union for a Made in Europe strategy to counter domestic production subsidies that the US had provided under the US Inflation Reduction Act and to accelerate production targets. China has gotten to the act too. The government there is eyeing domestic technology to replace imported know how to reduce dependence on geopolitical rivals. And because of all these developments, the IMF says globalization is now giving way to slowbalisation. How do you measure such a slowdown? If you said FDI, you'd be right. Foreign direct investment into countries across the globe has taken a beating. Let's take a look at this chart. From this infographic on your screen right now, you see that trade in goods and services globally has seen a moderate ride after the financial crisis of 2008-09. It has seen volatile times, but it has always recovered a bit whenever it has fallen down. But FDI has never really recovered to levels seen prior to the financial crisis of 2008-09. It will be interesting to see how geoeconomic fragmentation pans out over the next 5 to 10 years and whether India stands to benefit from reshoring or friendshoring of production. If you like this episode, do not forget to click on the like button and share this with your friends. Also, please remember to subscribe to our channel. Till we meet again, have a lovely week ahead.